everybody, and welcome back to the Music Rating, Ranking, and Review podcast of what to call Music Meltdown, in which we rate, rank, and review any artist discography, songs, musical topics, whatever comes to mind. This episode, we're going into the late 90s, into current day, for sort of an alt country, indie rock, kind of psych rock band at points, talking about My Morning Jacket. Had an episode of American Dad based on them, so that's interesting. With that being said, My Morning Jacket were a band I was fairly familiar with. Going into this, I knew Z, and I also knew Evil Urges. I think I might have heard another one at some point, but if so, it's escaping me. But I knew one of those records intently well, and the other one was Evil Urges. So we'll sort of see how that plays out. I'm a pretty solid fan of these guys, although I can admit, kind of akin to what I said in my Coldplay episode, very much a tale of two halves for me. And you'll see what that is as soon as I talk about my lesser records. That being said, I got a second Max on the show, not the Australian one this time. But Max, how are you feeling and your familiarity with My Morning Jacket?
I would say I'm quite familiar with My Morning Jacket. I got into them in 2006. I saw them open for Pearl Jam a couple of times. Eddie Vedder came on with them at the beginning of the second show and did It Makes No Difference by the band. They all did that together. That was pretty neat. And then, I love them so much opening that I went to see a show on that tour. And then I managed to see them a couple years later too. So I've seen them headline twice, open twice. And I've listened to the whole discography, very, very intently up to a point, up to kind of the Waterfall. And we'll get to that. But when the Waterfall came out, they kind of lost me. And I didn't put as much focus and attention into like the Waterfall II and the self-titled. And those are lower on my list, and that might be why. But the other albums I've listened to like over and over and over many, many times. And they do have at least one album, which will be my number one, which is one of my favorite albums ever.
Me too. They got one album that I think clearly shines above the rest, but there's a lot of greatness to be found in this catalog. That being said, I'll go ahead and kick it off. I have a feeling we're going in similar directions here because I think that this is pretty clearly their weakest record. For me, I'm going with the Waterfall 2. This was a pretty big letdown for me. I like the first Waterfall record, but I felt like there could be a little bit touched up on it to make it like a great album. This one is just not that. It feels very much like a leftovers record. It's mostly jamming, and the playing's good. I'm just kind of bored by it. I don't think that the production really elevates anything. It doesn't sort of highlight the individual parts as well as, say, Evil Urges or Circuital, however you say that album title. This kind of feels like a big blob sort of wall of sound thing. It's fine. It just doesn't really pull me in. And in comparison to every other My Morning Jacket record, it doesn't really have the highlights that really elevate it into like a top tier record. Sadly, I only have that one at 2.5 stars. I think it's pretty overall. But that's that. We go up from there pretty quick.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I feel like we are going to be close, but my number nine is actually different. My number nine is the latest one, the self-titled, and I think it's probably just because I had higher expectations for this, and it just really let me down. Um, I just feel like that energy and that passion they used to put into their music isn't really here very much. Like I remember when the singles were coming out, like when regularly scheduled programming came out, the first single, I was like, there are parts here that would make a good song. Like it's almost a good song, but it's not coming together. Like it's not as coherent as it should be. It's just a little off. And then Love, Love, Love came out, and I was like, okay, it's a good groove, but they're not doing anything super creative or interesting with it. It's just it kind of bored me a little bit. And then when I got the record, I didn't find it very engaging. Like I think the best song on here is In Color. I really like In Color a lot. And My Morning Jacket, is one of the few bands where I often don't have a lot of patience for bands that do, those, longer 7, 8, 9 minute where with those like extended instrumental sections. A lot of times that annoys me or takes me out of a song. But with them, their longer songs are often like their best songs. I always really look forward to like the 7, 8 minute songs on My Morning Jacket albums because they have this great build to them and stuff, and In Color delivers that. It's great. But then you have these ones like Devil in the Details and I Could Never Get Enough, which are like 9 minutes long. And I don't think they do enough. I don't think they're interesting enough to justify being like 18 minutes of this album. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's a decent record. I would probably put it at a 2.5. I flirted with giving it a 3 because I think it's fine. I know what the band is capable of, so I'm kind of grading it against that. I know how good they can be, and this is just way below their usual level, in my opinion.
All right, that's fair. For me, I kind of viewed it as kind of like a comeback from the record that preceded it, so that's kind of why it's higher for me. But I do get why it would be lower. This is where I think that we diverge because this is the disappointment of the catalog. Eight for me, I'm going Evil Urges. Here's the issue with Evil Urges: it has to follow the classic run. It has to follow Z and At Dawn, and like it's just never gonna match up to that for me. Especially hearing it just after Z, it's a pretty big disappointment to me. It's more of a shift into like a 70s inspired sort of psych rock sound at points. And I'm just not really as invested in this. I love that super hollowed out reverb sort of country sound that they have, and how they transition that into indie rock is so cool on Z. On here, weirdly, it feels a bit more sterile to me, despite it being an objectively more sort of wide spanning sound. So it's kind of weird how that holds out. There are some solid cuts here, though. The title track is great. It was actually the first My Morning Jacket song I ever heard, and I love that song. I'm Amazed is really good, as well as See Walking. I might go 3.5. However, one of the bigger singles off this record, Highly Suspicious, I think is really bad. I don't like that song much at all. I get it. It's just not for me. I have it at 3 stars. It's a pretty high 3 stars. Same with my next record. They're close to 3.5, but it's not what I want from that Morning Jacket. So number 8 going to be Evil Urges.
All right, and my I have that one much higher, of course, but my number 8 is your number 9. It's the Waterfall 2. And I can't remember being as simultaneously excited and disappointed for like an album release announcement. Because on the one hand, it was the first My Morning Jacket album in a really long time, in like 5 or 6 years, but it was material that was as old as the Waterfall. Like I remember when the Waterfall came out, that Jim James was like, "We recorded enough music to release a second album, and that's going to come out really soon." And at the time, I was really excited about that, getting two My Morning Jacket albums back to back. But it ended up taking, until the pandemic, when everybody was trapped inside, for him to finally finish this collection of songs and put it all together. And it's a stopgap release. It was just to get the ball rolling again, but it's just, as you would imagine, it's not up to the standard of their other records up to that point. I think Magic Bullet is really cool. I think it has some nice ballads on it, like "Spinning My Wheels" and "Welcome Home," which I know is kind of an older song. It was like on a holiday EP they put out way back. And I'm sure "Wasted" is really good live. It has that kind of feel to it. And I like that "Spinning My Wheels." I know it was probably written years before, but it was like a perfect pandemic song, because it's kind of about being stuck in a rut and kind of every day being the same and trying to get out of a cycle. So I really related to that song at the time, but then the rest of the record kind of dropped off for me. It's not bad. It's I think I could see giving it 3 stars because I think it's really solid. It's just not as memorable as their best stuff.
All right, that checks out. Kind of alluded to earlier, but not explicitly stated for me. Next up, I have Circuital. It's a solid improvement from Evil Urges, but still nothing I'm really crazy about. I just don't love the change of direction that they took after Z. It's well performed and the songs are decent. I don't really care as much for Jim Jane's higher register on these later records. I think that he's hitting the notes, sure. I'm just not loving how they're coming. And more often than not, it just comes across kind of flat to me. There are some quite good cuts though. Wonderful was really good. Out of My System, You Want to Freak Me Out, and Slow Slow Tune were my highlights. It's about the same level as Evil Urges. It doesn't have a Highly Suspicious for me, but at the same time, it doesn't have as high of a song as, say, the title track. So it's going to be 3 stars as well. It's my last 3 stars. Everything going up from here, I do think is good. Just had to get through a bit of my relative disappointment. So there we go. 3 stars for weird title.
Yeah, that's actually my number 7. I pronounce it Circuital. I don't know how the hell you're supposed to pronounce it, but that's just what I'm going to call it. Yeah, I think this is a really good album. I would go up to 3.5 on this, but for me, it was kind of just Evil Urges light. It's kind of doing what that record did, but a little more toned down. And I know some people will prefer that they think Evil Urges is like too crazy and went too far and they want something a little more pared down. But for me, I loved like the eccentricity and weirdness of that album, and this was kind of a step down for me. I don't know. What I really like about it is, I mean, it has some fun. I think Holding On to Black Metal is a really fun, like goofy single built around that sample. I think it's a Korean song. Um, and First Light is fun. What I admire most about this album is the first 2 tracks, the last 2 tracks. I think it kind of does this thing where they're like twin openers and twin closers. And I think it works really well. Like Victory Dance is a really good song in its own right, but it's almost like this kind of extended lead into Circuital, and the two work really well together. And then Slow Slow Tune and Moving Away, I think are both really good closers. But Slow Slow Tune would have been a really good closer, I should say. But like having them back to back like that, I think is just very kind of emotional and ends off the record on like a real high point. So for me, it's a really solid album. I think it is a step down from what they accomplished on Evil Urges. So 3.5.
All right. So we're kind of in somewhat similar views, except I just happen to prefer it to Evil Urges. But like I said, we're in good territory now. Next up for me is self-titled, My Morning Jacket. This sort of feels like a soft reboot of My Morning Jacket, combining some of the more rootsy origins with the psych rock sounds of the Waterfall in a solid manner. However, this album, they jammed before. This is their most jammy record, though. The tracks reaching like not 8, 9 minutes, taking up just a large portion of the record. And as you said before, those are the worst songs, but it is what it is. Still a solid release. I think Jim sounds better than he does across pretty much all the 2010s records to me. And there are still some pretty strong tracks here, my favorite of which being Lucky to Be Alive. As I was sort of mentioning earlier, though, the main issue here just boils down to the jams not jamming that well to me. A lot of the tracks just kind of drag, notably the Devils in the Details and I Can Never Get Enough. On the whole, though, it's a pretty solid release, and with some fine tuning, this could be like a great evolution for the band. And considering how good I hear they are live from so many people, I feel like this is kind of like probably maybe like incorporating a little bit of that live sound into the studio, which 50-50, that works for some groups, doesn't work for others. I think with some fine tuning, though, it could work, though. So I'm at 3.5. It's a pretty good record, but not quite top tier My Morning Jacket for me.
All right, and I'm up to 4 stars now. I really love all these albums. I'm a big fan of this band. But my number 6 is The Waterfall, which is one that I know a lot of people will have a lot higher. For me, it's an album that I had to learn to appreciate. Like when this came out, I was really disappointed because I thought it all sounded kind of samey and it was, kind of low energy compared to what I was used to from them. And I don't really know what album I was listening to because this is like a diverse, fun, interesting album. I mean, they do that 70s like soft rock thing on like some of the tracks, like especially on Compound Fracture. but there's more going on to it. I mean, there's really fun rock songs like "Believe" and "Big Decisions," which is one of their popular songs. It's co-written by the Closing Time guy. And in its infancy, the Waterfall, I think, is pretty incredible. Uh, and I really like the message of that song too. Um, Only Memories Remain, I really like as a closer. I like kind of how spare it is. I do wish that Hillside song, which is a song that was on like the bonus disc, was on the actual album, because I think it's a really nice coda to the record, and it like wraps up a lot of the record's themes in a really nice way. But overall, I can't put this any higher because I'm still kind of warming up to like half of it. But like the half of it that I love, I really love at this point. And I think I definitely treated the record unfairly when it came out. So 4 stars.
Nice, nice. Not quite at 4 stars yet, but I'm close. Next up for me is The Waterfall, which may be a bit contentious. Neither of us had it like top three, but we'll see. I want to like this album more than I do. It has this really cool kind of psychedelic sound to it. Playing is really strong. It's really tight. It's well performed. They sound great, as does the album. The main issue here is it feels kind of lax to me. And as I mentioned earlier on Sarky Jerky, I do have a bit of an issue with Jim James's higher register here. And just something about whenever he's singing higher in the 2010s, it just doesn't resonate with me like it would earlier on when he pulls out like his falsetto or something. There are still some really good tracks on here, though. The opener, Believe, was outstanding. Like It's River, in its infancy, and the closer, Only Memories Remain, are also very strong. I want to love this record. I think it's really cool. I think it lends really well to My Morning Jacket sound. But all in all, it just kind of leaves me a little flat for what it is. A solid 3.5 stars. It's a pretty good record, but it just doesn't touch the first four for me. So it is what it is.
All right, number what is this? Number 5 for me is the first album, The Tennessee Fire. Um, and I think this is an album that has been kind of underrated in recent years because of the heights the man got to on later albums. But I think the first 3 My Morning Jacket albums, they're kind of their own thing. Like they kind of sound like a different band. And then they moved beyond that sound on Z. But at the beginning, you kind of have this alt rock kind of reverby, kind of eerie kind of sound going on. And I think it's really cool. I mean, maybe this album is a little long, it's close to an hour, but there's so many awesome highlights on it, like They Ran and The Bear and I Will Be There When You Die, just like these really pretty, kind of haunting, beautiful ballads. And then good rock songs too, like, It's About Twilight Now and The Dark. And I really like the closer, I Think I'm Going to Hell. I think they made tighter albums than this, and more accomplished albums than this, but I think it has a really unique sound to it, and I really enjoy it because I think those first 2 we'll get to at Dawn later. I think they bring something that none of the other records really bring, and I think it's very unique and very specific, and I like it a lot. So 4 stars still.
Alrighty, I think this is where I'm going to lose some people. A lot of people have this one at 1 or 2. This record really just hasn't connected with me in the way that other ones have. Number 4 for me, I'm going to go with It Still Moves. Like I was saying, I know for a lot of people, this is top shelf My Morning Jacket, and I can kind of see why. You still have the very heavy reverb, sort of lonely country sound, mixed with some more jammy qualities, with rapping a bit of the indie rock as well. This, to me, though, is really just a stepping stone to Z, and it's too long. This record did not need to be like 80 minutes long. There are great songs found within it, but even more so than At Dawn, you really feel the length of this record, I think. I don't know. It doesn't feel as fully formed either. Like I was saying, it does sort of feel like a transitionary record, which at points that can be great. Like, for example, my favorite Roxy Music record was Manifesto, and that is a blatant transition between their glam rock to the pop scene. But this one just feels like a half measure in comparison. The album doesn't really get started for me until Golden. You don't really get like great tracks until One Big Holiday, I Will Sing You Songs, and Rolling Back. To clarify, it's still 4 stars. I love the sound. I love Jim James in this era. His writing. So it's not necessarily an issue. However, it's not quite those other 3 records I have above it. So I'm going 4 stars where it still moves. It's really good, but a bit bloated for me.
All right, my next one is At Dawn, which, once again, you could definitely say this album's too long. It's, over 70 minutes. But for the most part, I think it earns it. I mean, it does that twin closer thing again that Circuital did, I think, with Phone Went West and Strangulation. And I think both those are just fantastic songs. And once again, I think putting them together at the end of the record really enhances them. It enhances like the emotion of it, and just it's a really epic way to close the record. Once again, a lot of really pretty ballads on here, like Bermuda Highway and At Dawn. I think is kind of pretty and kind of creepy, and just a really neat kind of encapsulation of what made their early sound special. The way that he sings, I think, is really catchy, really fun song. So for me, it's very similar to the first album. I just think it's a refinement of it. It's like kind of a better version of that album. And yeah, I'm gonna stick with 4 stars. I think it's still a 4 star record.
Gotcha. Speaking of that debut album, my next up is The Tennessee Fire, which I guess I have to come and say that this is their most underrated record because I just like consistently see this one falling into like the bottom 3 or so, and I just don't hear it. I'm at a very high 4 stars, borderline of 4.5. I think this is a nearly great record. It's a very strong debut that sort of showcases to you everything that the band would do. It's the most alt country purely record that they ever did. It's very heavy on the reverb, the hollowness, the just sort of space and beauty to be found within these performances are really great. Jim James, even at the start of this, his writing is just spectacular. And despite there being a few missteps here and it just being a bit too long of a runtime, it's just such an enjoyable listen. Front to back, it's just really lovely, I think. Heartbreaking Man, The Bear, If All Else Fails, and Picture of You are all just fantastic tracks. There's a couple of weaker moments sprinkled in there, but all in all, it's still very, very close with a bit of minor trimming. It does hurt. It came out in the late 90s, so you're still getting a bit of that 90s CD bloat on it, as you will with that done. But if I could just tighten it a little bit, you could easily have a 4.5 star record in there, maybe even 5. Really great record.
All right, and my number 3, and I'm up to 4.5 now, is Evil Urges. And I think I felt actually similarly to the way you feel about it when it came out. When it, like the first time I heard this record, it actually kind of pissed me off because I'd gotten so used to Z, which is like a really tight album where every song is just immaculately crafted. And then I went into this, and there are all these like genre pastiches, and they're doing all this weird shit and like peanut butter pudding surprise and stuff. And I was kind of mad. I was kind of like, if you're not going to take this seriously, why should I take this seriously? Like, how do you follow up one of the best rock records I've ever heard with like this carnival freak show? But I've come to really like it for its diversity and its strangeness, and just showing the breadth of what they can do. Like there's so much disparate stuff going on here that's just really neat. Like you've got like Sek Walken is like really straight country, and then Remnants is like that hard rock thing, and I'm Amazed is kind of that southern rock kind of vibe. Evil Urges is kind of a soul kind of pastiche, and kind of like every track has something different going on and something interesting going on, and I think they all pull it off really well. And there is a sense of humor to it, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think the fun that they're having making this record kind of translates onto the album. If you it like once you accept that that's a part of it, it makes it kind of fun to listen to. It's kind of infectious. And once again, it does that dual closer thing they do so well with Smoking from Shooting leading into Touch Me, I'm Gonna Scream Part 2, which is just an awesome way to end off the album. And I saw them on the Evil Urges tour, and that 1-2 punch of those two songs was even better live. It was fantastic. So for me, it's just, I get that it's kind of goofy, but I also think it's really fun and really out there, and I've come to really admire it for those traits. So 4.5.
Alrighty. I know you aren't alone in that opinion. I don't necessarily know how it fared sort of critically, but I know there was definitely some pushback. And I'm seeing more and more people that I talk about to my morning check really sort of praise that record for what they were doing. Do I get it? No. Do you like it? That's fine. It is what it is. Number two for me, number one Z. Let's not kid. Number two is At Dawn. This is just a clear evolution from their debut. The sound's expanding, it's getting a bit larger in scope, but it's still filled out and still have that great reverb and fantastic playing here. The songs are just tighter too. The only thing that's worse is the length. Just shy of 80 minutes, you really feel it by the end of this record. Despite that, the style is fantastic. This one, it's a bit more rocking than the debut with even stronger performances from the band. And then you just gotta boil it down to the songs because there are so many just amazing songs sprinkled through here. The title track, Lowdown, Hopefully, Xmas Curtain, as well as Foam Went West are all just fantastic. And despite its length and me saying that there was a massive issue on something like It Still Moves, I think that this record properly justifies its length. And it's just a really tremendous listen. I can sit down and listen to them with oodles and oodles of reverb on everything day in, day out. I'm at 4.5 stars. I think this is a fantastic record.
All right. I'm at 5 actually now for these last two. I think they're in my eyes, they're both 5-star records. And I don't give something a 5 unless I really like every song on it. It can't have like a dud on it. And for me, my number two is It Still Moves. And I think this is, nothing's perfect, but these last two albums kind of flirt with perfection, in my opinion. Um, I do think that beyond this point, like I said, I think the first three albums are their own thing, and I think this is like as far as they could have taken that sound. I think it's kind of the perfection of that sound. Like, it's like, the major label jump, when bands get more polished, that can turn off old fans, and they can be accused of selling out or something. I think this is the ideal version of that, where they take that sound and they just polish it and make it as radio friendly and as enjoyable as it can possibly be while maintaining that amazing songwriting. I mean, One Big Holiday, I think, is still probably their signature song. you know that's the song that I think kind of defines them in the eyes of a lot of fans. And then Steam Engine is the song that you always hope for when you go to see them live. It's such a grand, epic, beautiful song. I Will Sing You songs similar appeal to it too. Golden is just a beautiful ballad. Tons of great ballads on here. Tons of great rock songs like Magada and Dance Floors. It's just I love every song on here, and I think it's actually so good that it kind of bums me out that I can't put it as number one, because I love it so much. But yeah, it has to be number two. But I do think it is approaching perfection.
All right. Well, it doesn't have to be number two because it was my number four, but it is what it is. Number one, though, come on, come on. It's Z. It's Z. Obviously. As much as the other My Morning Jacket records are really good, there's some great ones in there. Z is so much better for me. This is just a brilliant indie rock album. They drop most of the country sound here, but you still have all of the reverb and all of the hollowness to it, which really just gives it such a unique sound. You don't typically hear this much sort of space and this much sort of echoing on a lot of the indie rock from the era. So it really does make it stick out in just all of these brilliant ways. It's one of my favorite produced records of the aughts, if I'm being honest. I love the sound of this record. It allows all the instruments to have such great space and sort of just surround you while you're listening to it. It's just stunning. Jim James sounds fantastic. The guitars are brilliant, and the songwriting is a step above pretty much everything that they've done before. Every song is fantastic here, but the two-song stretch of Off the Record and Into the Woods is far and away my favorite song stretch that they ever had in the catalog. I mean, what more can I say? It's an easy five-star album. It's absolutely outstanding. Probably somewhere in my top 30 all time. Really love it.
Yeah, I mean, my number one is obviously also Z, and like you, I think it's one of my favorite albums. I I just I I love every song on here. I mean, my least favorite on the album is probably Lay Low, and that's still a great song. Um, it's just it has such a unique vibe to it that they don't get on any of their other albums. I like what you said about all the space in it, that they really let the songs breathe. I think that's very true. Um, but it's just it's got so much fun stuff on it, like Anytime and What a Wonderful Man and Off the Record, which I think is like a great catchy single. And then they have that part at the end that they can kind of expand out live, and it's just, it's an ideal My Morning Jacket song, I think. And some beautiful ballads on here. I love the way the album is bookended, because starting with Wordless Chorus, which has this really unique sound to it, and then ending with Don Dante, which is just like an emotional powerhouse, and one of their, probably, I would say definitely their best closer. And another song you always hope for live, because it's just unbelievable. And yeah, this album, and Into the Woods too. I mean, I think a lot of people say that the one weak spot on the album is Into the Woods, but I also really like it. I think it's a really odd, unique song. It sounds like nothing else in their catalog. And I really enjoy it. I really enjoy everything on here. And I think, some bands, you just know when they reach a peak, that as good as they're going to be in the future, they're never going to exceed that. And this album is very much that for me with My Morning Jacket. They can get different than this and they can do really good stuff, but they're never going to get better than this. 5 stars.
Nice, nice. Yep, I'd probably have to agree to that. As much as I like the other catalog, the rest of the catalog, I made it pretty abundantly clear. It's pretty far and away their best for me. It's just pretty much a perfect encapsulation of what indie rock in the aughts can be. It's such a good record that it really does kind of hurt the rest for me in a weird way, but just sort of how it works sometimes, you know. That being said, any final remarks on My Morning Jacket, or do you think that we sort of said our piece?
I mean, I think we kind of did it. I mean, I think what I admire so much about the band, can be like a blessing and a curse, which is that they don't sit still. You know, they could have just kept iterating on It Still Moves over and over, and just doing that old country thing, and they could have been very successful at that. But I like that they continue to evolve and they continue to try new things, and they're not satisfied with resting on their laurels. I think that's really cool. And that can, alienate people, like it kind of alienated me with the new one, you know. But I also don't know, because I didn't like the Waterfall when it came out. I didn't like Evil Urges when it came out. And I've learned to appreciate those records so much. Maybe the self-titled will be that for me in a few years. But I just I like so much that they're staying creative and staying invested, not letting their sound get stagnant. And I just think they're really super creative, super talented people, and I hope I get to see them live again soon.
Yep, they're pretty high on my list of artists I want to see live, at least at some point.
Yeah,
We
they're unbelievable live. They
Nice,
really
nice.
are.
I hear nothing but great things. That
Yeah.
being said, though, that was the My Morning Jacket discussion. Figure this one probably isn't going to do big business, but what do my videos do? With that being said, I really hope you enjoyed this and you had a great time.